Okay, so let's finally finish this. So where have we been basically stuck here? So this is the create post. So right now what we don't have is any kind of authentication process, right? So that's what's going to be basically the interesting point, is how do we do this? So let's basically jump into a couple of concepts here. What we probably want to start out with is to basically say, okay, we need a model, right? So now we have our post model that basically looks like this, and we also need our user model. So let's create a new class that we're going to be calling user. And what we want to do is, okay, the namespace is models that generates all of this. So this is already basically okay, right? That is okay. Let's do this. Okay, so yes, we want to add that to Git, and this implements model. Right, not sure why this is, must declare an abstract implement method find. Right, so what we have now is basically we need a find. Remember, that's what we basically said, hey, you need to have this, which is fine, which is exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to create a function find, and I think it needs to be static. Yeah, it needs to be static. And so the way we did this is to say, like, okay, so we have this post ID we don't really require, but we basically say, okay, this basically, if I create this as a new instance, then I'm going to create a new user or a new whatever right away, and otherwise I'm going to use static functions, right? So I have my static function find, and that would basically go to the database. Now let's see what we have in here. So we only have post. So do you see what we did? We had an insert date, a delete date, and an ID that is auto incremented. So what we want to do is to create a new table that we're going to be calling user, and it has an ID, which is our primary key and is auto incremented, and it also has a let's call this username. And actually, let's stick to our system here. So the username, actually, let's not overdo it. That's absolutely fine. And what we also need is and this is something that I would normally, go and spread out into multiple tables, but right now I'm just going to say password, and that is going to be a varchar of 200, and then I'm going to have my regular fields, so an insert date, which is going to be a timestamp with the default of a current timestamp, and I'm going to have a delete date, which is going to be a date time. Date time, and that defaults to null, so that's fine. And that's all I want to do for now. So let's keep this as simple and primitive as possible. Okay, so let's execute that. Yep. In that case, yes. Oh, come on. Okay. So as you can see, it's basically now part of the my PHP Basics database, and now I can basically say, okay, so here's my condition, right? And here I can basically say, okay, return and db easy. And in that case, I want to say user everything where condition, right? That's basically going to be my find. And the more interesting thing, of course, is going to be, well, what about a new user? Construct, and let me basically see, we put in ones, right? Okay, here is the new user, and the new user will basically say, okay, so we will have this user ID, which we don't have yet, so that's fine. And let's make that private. User ID, actually, let's make that public. Right? And so here's basically what we need. Right? Here is when we say, okay, so this is going to be another DB. In that case, it's going to be an ask. And we're going to say, so what do we really need? We want to insert into user. And what do we want to insert? We want to insert the username, which we expect to be new user, username, or let's keep this all consistent, just to not confuse anyone. And we want to have the password, which is going to be, and so here we go now. So there are basically two methods of going about a password, right? One would be encryption, and one would be hashing. So for beginners, I recommend hashing, because with encryptions, there are a little bit of pitfalls that would potentially make it insecure, and therefore nothing that we actually want, right? We want this to be as safe as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to directly use the password hash functionality. So this is something that is just built into PHP, right? And my rams are at the bottom. Come on, I cannot move my mouse. Okay. Hello. Okay. Password hash. And here I'm going to basically say, okay, let's do that. And this is our new user password, right? And what we can do here is we can basically set the algorithm. Now you can set a particular encoding here, like a SHA, whatever. So what I would recommend is to just do the password default for now, and that will basically be logical from maintainability, because this basically might update eventually, and then you basically see you don't have to touch the actual code again, right? So this is basically, okay, this is our password default. That is how we're going to do our hashing process. And to retrieve the user, so let's say that is basically everything we need, and the only thing we're going to do here is, are we going to return this? Let me actually see how we did this in here. We didn't. Okay, so that's all it's doing. Got it. It's a construct anyway, so we can't return. Okay, now what we want to do here is we want to have a login functionality, right? So I'm going to say, okay, and this is going to be a static function login, and here I'm going to say username, password. So here I'm going to actually make those single occurrences, where I say, okay, so what do we really want here, right? So first let's get the user, and this is basically, okay, DB easy, and we're going to say, okay, user, also everything. And here we're going to say, well, what are the conditions where username is username and delete date is not set, so empty. You can write this in a shorter way and say without delete date. Okay, so let's see. This is our response. And our response is basically, let's say it's false for now. Now, here we're going to have an if and say, okay, if not empty. So there are two possibilities from here on, right? We either find the user with that given username, or we don't. So we assume that, okay, so we found it now. Otherwise, at the end of all of this, we're going to return our response, right? So if this is not found, then this if already doesn't run. So if this is not empty, so don't forget that this always returns an array, which basically means that this is either an empty array or an array with one hit. You want to set the username probably to unique, but that's a different story. Actually, I want to do that right now before I forget. Let's do that. And say modify table. And here, I want to set this to unique. Want this to fail, right? If the username is already given. Actually, can I have this like that? Okay. Okay, fair enough. So if this username is found, let me quickly see what's going on here. Okay. If this username is found, then in the next step, what we want to do is to say, well, then we have to see whether or not, the password is okay. So don't forget that the user password, right, is basically the, let's call this the database password for now, would be user 0, so the first hit, password. Okay, so we're going to go with that. And what we now basically want to do is to say, like, okay, so what about the password that the user claims to have? Is that the same as this one? And PHP has a password verify function, right? Where we basically say, okay, so here's the password string, and then there's the hash. So here we're going to put in the password that we got, and then we're going to put our database password in here. Okay, so basically what we want to do here is to shorten this a little bit and say, okay, if not empty user and password verify, and of course we don't have this yet, so we have to go like that. Okay, then here that means now we're logged in. Right, so we can now say, okay, the response equals user 0, and can basically get this out. There's one thing that we should probably do if we do it like that, and we should actually unlink user 0 password. Okay, so we don't have that in our system. Let's see what it's bitching about. Unused element users. Okay. Unhandled exception. Yeah, we're going to do all of that stuff outside. Okay. So far, so good. Now, let's create a maybe first of all, we need a couple of controllers, right? So we have this home. So what I would like to do is I would like to create a very simple, I don't want to get too JavaScript heavy. I want to create a very simple sign up. So let's do that. So we create a new class that we are going to call in sign up. Those are the controllers. Yeah, everything is fine so far. Okay, and this, what did we say, extends controller. Is that how we did it? Or does it implement controller? Let me quickly see. Extends, no, that's fine. Extends controller. Unused element sign up, okay, fair enough. And in our controller we have a function construct, right? So let's quickly remind ourselves of how that looks like. So we have a, oops, that is our, let's maybe take something that actually has a view. our contract, and this is what we need to set, right? This is like, okay, what is this doing? Right, so we can more or less just copy that over and see how is that relevant for us. Yes, let's include those. Actually, let's not include those, but that's fine. So that is going to use my sign up view. And I don't need anything in here other than, actually, let's keep the web path. Who knows if we need it. And in my views, what I do, well, first of all, let's get rid of this one. We don't need that. In my views, what I need is, let's actually here quickly switch to God mode here, bum. In my views, I basically need to create that, of course, and say, okay, new HTML file, sign up. Add that to Git as well. So don't forget that this will be a partial, so I don't need any of this other than a form. And this form will basically have a couple of, did we use any particular framework? Let's actually look at this. What are we using? Spectra. Okay. Gotta be honest, don't really know that much. Let's do the following and say, hey, Spectra CSS, Spectra CSS. There we go. It's probably that one. Let's go to forms, right? Elements, forms. Okay, how do you guys look like? Like that. Sure. Let's do that. So back to our sign up. So the only thing we want to have here is a username. John Doe 23. And probably here we want to say username. Yeah, if we need that at all, but more importantly, where's the name of this? This doesn't have a name. That is something we need to take care of, and that is our username. Okay, and then of course we have this whole shebang again, where we say password. Here we need to be careful with the type, and basically here we're going to say password, and the same is what we're going to do here, and the same is what we're going to do here. And there will be, of course, no placeholder in this case. And there's going to be a min length of 8, and both of those fields are required. Okay, and then here at the end of it, we have a button. This button has the type submit, and probably some classes that I am btn, sure, btn primary, sounds good. And here I say register. Okay, so far so good. So this is all we need to do, right? We need to simply create this, and the routing should be automatic at this point. So let's see if that's true. So if I basically say, okay, what happens if I go to sign up? And I can see, well, in that case, I am on my sign up page. So that basically all already works. Now, the question is, of course, well, okay, where do I want to post this? So again, I would actually recommend doing this with JavaScript and then, you know, sending it to an API. But let's do for the sign up a very basic principle and say we're going to post to ourselves, right? So the only thing that I really want to set here is to say method is post. And here I can then basically say, okay, what's going on? Now, I can basically say, well, if set post username let's do sign up, and then create this function here. Function do sign up. Yeah, let's do that directly in here. Let's do that directly in here, and then of course we have to fix this. Oops. To be directly here. Okay. Let's see. What we have is. Let me quickly have a little bit of interaction here with people. Yeah, okay. Got it. Sorry, 1 second here. Who is here? Okay. Yeah, let's maybe do it like here and say okay. So in our do sign up, type in word sign up. Okay, let's be strict. Let's be strict and see if it likes it better. There we go. In our do sign up, what we basically want to do is a couple of things, right? So now we expect that post username and post what's it called? Password is basically set. So what we want to do is to do two things. So first, we want to say, okay, ensure fields, right? And we can more or less automate this with our database setup. So what we're going to do with the where's our? Oh, we only have the login here, right? Where we say, okay, username is new user username and this is password. What we can do is to simply simplify this process for us and say, hey, this username, let's actually change this. Oops, that's not how it works. Modify table and say, hey, this username is not null, right? This must be set. Let's execute that. And then in that case, this will basically throw a DB exception, which is fine, which is exactly what we want. So let's try it out. So in the do sign up, what we're going to say is try. And what we are going to try is to say, okay, so in our users models, sorry, that's not even what I wanted to do. We're going to say user equals new users, right? And then again, be careful. So this happens automatically for me here, right? You might have to write it like this if you don't write in a use case, right? So new users, where I'm directly going to input post, right? And this is safe only because of how this works. So this generates a prepared statement, and basically you don't have to worry about the post here. Only if you declare, keys dynamically, you have to watch out what you're doing. But here it's absolutely safe. So this will either work or not, right? So what will this throw? This will throw a DB exception. And that's basically our worst case scenario, right? So either this will work and then we have a new user. So if we have a new user, what we are going to do is we're going to set, like some form of positive here. Probably kind of directly log them in the long run. But for now, what we're going to do is to say, okay, what happens if this is not successful, right? So let's basically say, well, what could be the possible messages? So what I'm going to start here is to say, okay, I'm going to have a public message, right, that I'm going to set to empty. And here I'm going to basically say, okay, this message is something we're going to pass through. And in our sign up, I'm basically going to have some kind of well, let's see how we're going to do that. But right now, what we're going to do is to basically say, so if this user exists, then we're basically going to, actually we can make this even easier and say, hey, let's directly return that. Right? So, or no, let's do it here. We say, we don't want to return, we want to set the message. That's what we're going to do. So here we say, okay, so the message, oops, this message equals, you can now log in, and in our, here we're going to say this message is the username is already taken, or, well, that's basically because otherwise they have tried to trick us. That's all we need to tell them, right? So there are two possibilities. Either they somehow send a post request here that didn't fulfill the specs, in which case they didn't use our form, or the username is already taken. So since that's the case, the only message I really want to provide is for the people actually using it. Otherwise, it just fails and says the same, and then you don't know what's happening, and that's fine. So here's the new user, and now let's basically see whether or not we can actually talk to this on that level, right? So first of all, we need to say, like, okay, where we're going to display the message. So what we could do is to basically say, oh, okay, so after this form, we're simply going to have a diff. Oh, don't know what that is. We're simply going to have a diff, and that diff is going to have like a very, very stupid h3 with our message. And that's all that we're doing for now. And kind of wonder how that looks like from the standpoint of, no, where are you? Okay, let's see how that looks like. Right, so now we don't really see it. And here's my username, and as you can see, like there's some pre-fills here because my localhost is something that I of course use often. So let's click on register. Okay, you can now log in. That's now my message, right? And so let's see if I actually open the user, what's happening. Oop. Okay. So I'm kind of wondering why I don't get any kind of, is that, am I not, why this didn't throw any kind of issues here. So that did not work. And the question is, why not? Why didn't even throw some kind of errors either? Let's figure this one out, huh? So I want to say, hey, So apparently this didn't work. And you still set it, which means it didn't return any kind of error. So let me do a var dump of user, which should return the ID, right? And then say die. Oh, is it more than the ID? What does the new user actually do? It just sets the user ID. Okay. Okay, let's see. Let's see, and then go back and fire this again. Oh, there's actually an error number in here. Okay. I'm kind of wondering why this doesn't throw an exception. It's probably we didn't set the error handling, but that's okay. My guess is, yeah, let's actually Google this. Incorrect datetime value. Incorrect datetime value. So I guess that's a timestamp with the current timestamp. That's a datetime, and this is null, right? The delete date. Let's actually quickly make sure that that's the case. Where's my modified table? So my delete date, yeah, that can be null. And it's my timestamp, defaults to current timestamp. Not sure what's happening here, to be honest with you. Let's see. Why is it in? This is probably something that happens on the database itself. And might be that we don't have any kind of, no, but I do have a, you know what, let's try the following. I'm just curious. This is probably nothing that actually affects you in reality. I think this has more to do with my setup. So I'm going to manually set an insert date now and see how that behaves, okay? Same thing. This is so weird. Let's set that to null and then figure out what's wrong with my, no. What is going on? I think I know what's going on. Yeah, okay. Okay. Yes, so that is actually quite cool that we ran into this. So what the password hash likely returns something that starts with a $sign. And then it basically, there are a couple of things about the DBS that you should know. Whenever you want to make sure that whatever comes back or is inserted as is, then the only thing you need to do is to prepend an equal sign. And that basically gets rid of the issue that you might have, because you can do stuff like, well, you know, what if it's greater than, and you've seen the dot, you know, and all those kind of things. So with the equal sign, what you ensure is that the whatever character encoding comes in here doesn't affect what dbask tries to do here. So yeah, so now we have that in our. We basically want to get rid of our die here. And that works. So now, if we do this again, we should basically say that everything's okay, and we can now log in. Now, where can we log in is the next question. And the question would be, well, we don't have any kind of login page as of yet. So let's do two things. First of all, let's go to our, where is it? Our main, and say, hey, in our nav, we're going to take the navs here, it's even higher. In our index, where we say, hey, our navs, let's create 2 more navs. And one is for register, and that goes to sign up. And one is for login, and that goes to login. Now, we don't have a login yet, right? So why don't we just create a new controller where we say it's called login, and it extends our controller, and there we go. And so the way that we want to generate a login, and here we're going to go into basically, okay, what are we going to do when we, if we want to keep basically state. And so the easiest solution for that is to basically say we have to make sure that a session runs everywhere, right? So let's quickly get a little bit of a session tool here, and say composer, or actually, you know what? Let's write that ourselves. Let's write that ourselves, and make sure that in our index DB, where we require our startup, where's our startup? That what we're going to do here is to say session start. Just to make sure that we have a session whenever we execute this, right? Way before anything else would happen. So that's cool. Now we should have our session. So after our login, we probably want to basically create a session. So let's go back to our login and say, okay, how does a login work? A login basically says, okay, we need to have a, first of all, we need to have a view, right? So we'll get back to our function construct and say, okay, this view is, and again, we can do this relatively easy. We can almost copy this from the sign up, right? We can almost copy this from the sign up, and actually to an extent where we can slowly wonder, yes, the template we need, where we can slowly wonder, well, hold on a second, is this really, this is exactly the same field, right? So could we not use this HTML to basically say, okay, well, hold on a second, the only difference here is whether or not we're going to register a login. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Let's do that. So I'm going to say action, and in my sign up, I'm going to add this. Let's say action is sign up, and in my login, I'm going to say I don't need this. Maybe I do. Maybe I do. And I see action equals login. Okay. And now the question, should this really be still called sign up? Probably not. Let's call this credentials. And same in our here. Let's call this credentials. And then of course, last but not least, let's actually rename this to credentials. Okay. So let's make sure that that still works. So here's my basic sign up. Let's go there. Now you can see now it says sign up. Let's see if login still works. Okay. Well, we don't have a message, but as you can see, everything in theory works, and then we have a login. Now that's pretty awesome. Now we can basically start reusing views. So far so good. Let's go back to our login controller and say, okay, so first of all, we need this message, right? Okay, that makes sense. Let's set that. Private message. That's empty. And so what we do want to do here is to basically say a little bit almost the same, right? So what happens if we have a post username, right? In that case, what we want to do is to say, well, this do login. Okay, again, doesn't exist. So let's create it and say, okay, in our user model, right? There is a static function login where we pass in username and password, and if that all works, we get the user back, right? So let's see if that's the case, and say, okay, user equals, and then I say user model login, and first thing would be my post username, and next would be my post password. And again, let's directly say, well, what does this actually do? And die afterwards and see what that brings us. So what we should be able to do now is, so here we're on the login. If I click this, then, okay, I cannot unlink this password. That makes sense. I have a problem in my user model. Where is it? This is of course unset, not unlink. Okay, fair enough. Looking for, yep, let's do it again. Okay, and as you can see, I now get out my actual user, right? This is exactly what I wanted to do. Okay, so fair enough. What should we do when a user logs in successfully? Actually, let's first do something else and say, hey, what happens if it's not successful? Okay, not sure what the hell's going on right now. Okay, so let's say I'm going to do a queue in here. Bum. Interesting. And now it says false. Okay, so not successful. So let's do those basically and say, okay, from a login, this user now could be false, right, or not. So let's do the false case first. Okay, if not user, then this message is credentials not valid. Okay, and in the other case, we have a couple of things that we need to do, right? So what we want to do here is basically set a session. So the user's logged in. So let's say, okay, session user equals the user, right? Let's give it the whole shebang here. And that's basically everything I need to be concerned right now. Let's make this super simple. And then what I probably also want to do is I want to redirect in that case and say, okay, so in that's let's redirect to, or actually that's actually something that I don't know if you want to do that. I'm going to make this simple and end it here, and to simply say, okay, you are logged in. Okay, so that's all. That's basically something that we basically want to do. So the only thing that we probably want to do is to prove that our session is working. Is here in our construct, we're basically going to say, hey, if isSet session user, this message equals you are logged in. Right? We already see that we're duplicating code, so we should do this differently, but for now it works because we're running a little bit out of time. So let's see. Oh, no, I don't want to resubmit. I want to go actually to this and then say I want to log in, and bam. Okay, I am logged in. Now let's see what happens if I go to about and then go back to login, and you see like, oh no, you are already logged in, right? So now we basically have a basic authentication that will basically work for us, regardless of where we are. And what we're going to do with that and how we're going to secure things with that is something that we're going to look in the next session. Oh, Football Maniac is actually online watching. I didn't see that, sorry. I need to go. I have a meeting in a couple minutes and need to definitely get some coffee in first. Nothing was working. I gave up on building something. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Hey, listen, I have in, I don't know what time zone you are in. I have now 2 meetings and then a little bit of work, but in, let me see, 1, 2, let me actually check. Never give up. So, I need to hurry up here. So I'll be back in, what is my upcoming stuff here? 3:30 Eastern time. So 3:30 GMT minus 4. Oh, it is 7 where you are. Okay. Well, then let's do tomorrow. How's that? Write me in the morning write me in your afternoon. And then we'll look into what your issues are. It's something super, pathing is really something super simple. Okay? And just for everybody else watching this, don't give up. I mean, this sometimes you need to be brave and throw things away and say, like, I'm going to start from scratch. And otherwise you kind of maneuver yourself into a little, a corner. So sometimes it makes sense to just, okay, let's do it again. It goes sometimes faster. You're the one with Laravel problems. Yeah, right. That is. I actually invited a Laravel specialist to the Discord, so you might be lucky, and I haven't heard back from him yet. But he is working with Laravel for actually, I think when it came out. So he is as close to the project itself as you can get, and for example, would tell you not to use caching while you're developing. But yes, so. Nonetheless, sorry. It's cool that you guys are online, but unfortunately, I really have to hop off. So I hope I have more time for you guys next time. Sorry about that. Really sorry.